Hey everyone. Thanks for clicking. I'm Alex. I'm 32, and 3 years ago, my own mother called me a worthless failure at my brother's engagement dinner, kicked me out of my childhood home, and announced she was giving the entire house to him as a wedding gift. It was an inheritance I was supposed to share, stolen in a single sentence. Before I tell you about the moment my brother drove past my new place and his jaw hit the floor, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. I read every single one. It's a day that plays over in my mind like a movie I can't turn off. Each detail burned into my memory. The heavy scent of my mother's signature roast chicken and garlic mashed potatoes filled our formal dining room in Greenwich, Connecticut. The air itself felt heavy, thick with unspoken tensions that clung to the velvet drapes. It was supposed to be a celebration. My older brother, Leo, the golden child, was getting married. His fiancée, Chloe, sat beside him, a portrait of smug perfection. Her diamond ring, a rock the size of a small bird's egg, perpetually caught the light from the crystal chandelier overhead. I sat opposite them, a ghost at the feast. My mother, Eleanor, was at the head of the table, presiding over the meal with the silent, stony judgment of a queen. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was a weapon. I really had. I'd put on my best shirt, forced a smile, and tried to bridge the chasm that had been widening between us for years. I asked Leo about his latest promotion at the hedge fund. He'd given me a one-word answer, "Good," before turning to whisper something in Chloe's ear that made her giggle. I congratulated Chloe on the wedding plans. She'd given me a tight, dismissive smile and said, "Thanks," her eyes already scanning the room for someone more important to talk to. My mother hadn't made eye contact with me since I arrived. She just moved the food around her plate, her lips pressed into that familiar thin, disappointed line. Finally, the suffocating silence became too much to bear. I had to try one more time to connect, to show them I wasn't the dead end they thought I was. I cleared my throat, my voice sounding unnaturally loud. "So, I actually have some good news," I started, a nervous energy buzzing under my skin. "The software I've been developing, the one for tracking renewable energy usage for businesses, we just landed our first real pilot program with a small grocery chain." A beat of absolute silence. Then Leo looked up, a lazy, condescending smirk playing on his lips. "Still playing with your little computer projects, Alex? That's nice. Good for you." My mother put her fork down on her china plate with a sharp, definitive clink. It was the sound of a judge's gavel. The storm had arrived. "Nice?" she repeated, her voice dangerously low and cold. "It's not nice, Leo. It's a waste. A complete and utter waste of a life." She finally turned her gaze on me, and her eyes were like chips of ice. "I look at you, Alex, and all I see is disappointment. Your brother is a vice president. He has a future, a real salary, a fiancé. He is building something. And what do you have? A pilot program? You're 32 years old and you have nothing to show for it. No savings, no serious job, just hobbies." My throat felt like it was closing up. "It's more than a hobby, Mom. It's my career." "A career?" She let out a short, bitter laugh that cut me to the bone. "Don't be ridiculous. You are a failure. And I will not have a failure living under my roof and tarnishing this family's name any longer." She rose from her chair, her napkin falling to the floor like a surrendered flag. "Leo and Chloe are getting married. They need a proper home to start their lives, a home that reflects their status. So, I'm giving them this house, as an early wedding present, an inheritance for the son who actually made me proud." The words hung in the air, sucking all the oxygen out of the room. I stared at Leo, searching his face for any sign of shock or protest. There was none, only a flicker of pure, unadulterated triumph. He knew. This had been planned. I was being ambushed. "Mom, you can't be serious," I whispered, the words barely audible. "I have never been more serious," she said, her voice like steel. "Pack a bag. I want you out. Tonight." And just like that, 25 years of my life in that house were erased. I stood up, my chair scraping harshly against the polished hardwood floor. I didn't shout. I didn't plead. A strange, cold calm had settled over me. I looked at each of their faces one last time, memorizing the image of their victory. Then I turned and walked out of the dining room. I went up the stairs to the room that had been my sanctuary, threw a few clothes into a duffel bag, and walked back down. As I reached the front door, the heavy oak door I'd run through 1,000 times as a kid, I paused. I could hear their voices from the dining room, the murmur of conversation already resuming as if nothing had happened. I hadn't been a person to them. I had been an inconvenience, and now I was gone. The door clicked shut behind me, the sound echoing in the cold, empty night. It was the sound of my life breaking in two. That night wasn't a sudden earthquake. It was the final, violent collapse of a structure that had been rotting from the inside for decades. The signs were always there, written in the language of birthday presents and holiday dinners, of praise and punishing silence. Growing up in Greenwich, my mother taught us that life was a competition, and perception was reality. It was about having the right address, the right car, the right kind of children. For her, Leo was the right kind of child. I was a flawed product, a source of constant, low-grade embarrassment. I remember my 16th birthday with perfect clarity. It was a quiet Tuesday night. My dad, Richard, was still alive then, a warm, grounding presence in a house that often felt cold. He slid a box across the dinner table. It was a generic brown cardboard box, a little beat up around the edges. Inside was a used laptop. It had a few scuffs on the lid, but it was a beast. A machine with a powerful processor and a high-end graphics card. "It's got more RAM than you'll know what to do with," he'd said, his eyes sparkling with a shared, secret excitement. "This will let you run the simulations for that energy tracking app you're designing. It'll take it to the next level, son." For me, it was like being handed the keys to the universe. My mother, however, had barely looked up from her salad. "Another toy," she'd sighed, the word dripping with disappointment. "Richard, you indulge his fantasies. He needs to be focused on his SAT prep, not these games." That night, my dad and I stayed up until 2 a.m. in the garage, our makeshift lab. We had a giant whiteboard on one wall, and we sketched out complex algorithms and data flow charts. He was a software engineer by heart, a man who had traded his passion for a lucrative but soul-crushing career in finance to please my mother. He saw a part of his younger self in me, the part he'd had to sacrifice. He was the only one who understood that what I was doing wasn't a game. "Don't ever let anyone tell you this is a waste of time, Alex," he told me, his hand on my shoulder, the smell of whiteboard markers sharp in the air. "What you're building, this is the future. They just can't see it yet." 6 months later, the house was transformed for Leo's 16th birthday. It was like a scene from a movie. Professional caterers with white jackets bustled in and out of the kitchen. A DJ was set up by the pool, the bass thumping through the floorboards. The main event was in the driveway. A brand new, cherry red sports car, a machine of pure, pointless speed, with a giant, ridiculous bow on the hood. My mother stood beside it, beaming with a kind of radiant pride I had never seen directed at me. She handed Leo the keys as her friends and our relatives applauded. My uncle, Lawrence, her brother, was there, of course, clapping Leo on the back with a booming laugh. "Now that's a sweet ride. Wall Street's future star deserves nothing less." I stood off to the side, near the dessert table, holding a paper plate and feeling like a stranger at my own family's home. Later that evening, I was walking past the study and overheard my mother talking to Uncle Lawrence. The door was slightly ajar. "Leo just gets it, you know?" she was saying, her voice filled with a deep, satisfied pride. "He understands how the world really works. Money, ambition, status. That's what matters. Alex, he's just lost in his own little world of codes and wires. It's worrisome." My uncle had made a soothing noise. "Don't you worry, Eleanor. Some kids are just late bloomers. He'll come around. Though I have to say, those nerdy hobbies won't ever buy him a house in this neighborhood." Their shared laughter followed me down the hall. It wasn't loud or cruel. It was worse. It was casual, dismissive, as if my entire identity was a mildly amusing joke. My dad was my shield, my translator, my advocate. When I won first place at the regional high school science fair for a working prototype of my home energy monitor, he was the one cheering so loudly he embarrassed me. He took the cheap, plastic trophy and the certificate and had them professionally framed. He hung the newspaper clipping with its grainy photo of me right in the center of his home office wall. "The world needs innovators like you, Alex," he'd said, his voice thick with an emotion that made my throat tighten. "Not just another banker." My mother glanced at the trophy when I brought it home and offered that thin, tight smile that was more of a grimace. "That's nice, dear. Just a school project, right?" It wasn't a question. It was a statement, a box she was putting me in. It was her way of diminishing the achievement, of keeping my world small while she was expanding Leo's. She couldn't see the hours of work, the passion, the vision. All she saw was something that didn't come with a price tag or a fancy title from a big corporation. She saw something worthless. And when she looked at it, I knew she was really looking at me. The foundation of my world didn't just crack. It disintegrated 3 weeks before my high school graduation. It was a rainy Thursday night in May. My dad was driving home from a late meeting in the city. The police report said a truck hydroplaned on the slick asphalt of the interstate. It was instantaneous. One phone call from a state trooper, a blur of flashing red and blue lights painting streaks on our wet windows, the sterile antiseptic smell of a hospital waiting room, and then he was gone. The last real conversation I ever had with him was just a few days before the accident. He'd found me in the garage, hunched over my laptop, trying to debug a piece of code that was making my head spin. He didn't say anything for a few minutes, just watched me. A thoughtful, almost melancholy expression on his face. "You know," he started, his voice quiet, "I was like you once. I loved building things, solving complex problems. I was going to start my own software company." He paused, looking at the tangled lines of code on my screen. "Then I met your mother. I went into finance. It was good money, it gave our family this comfortable life, but a part of me always wondered what if. A part of me feels like I've been playing a role for 30 years. He looked me straight in the eye, his gaze intense. "Alex, promise me something. Whatever you do with your life, follow your heart. Build the things you want to build. Don't chase the money like I did. The fulfillment, it's not the same. Don't let anyone talk you out of your dreams." I had mumbled something like, "Sure, Dad, I promise," not fully grasping the profound weight of his words. They felt like just another piece of fatherly advice. Now, they were his last will and testament to me. They became a sacred vow, a legacy I had to honor. His death wasn't just the loss of a father. It was the loss of my only ally, my only defender in a family where I felt like a foreign exchange student. In the suffocating haze of grief that followed, my mother's focus sharpened, but it was like a camera lens twisting to bring one object into crisp detail while everything else blurred into the background. Leo was the object. I was the background. "Leo needs to stay focused," she'd tell her friends over the phone, her voice brittle and strained. "His final exams are coming up, and then he's off to NYU. We can't let this tragedy derail his entire future." I remember one afternoon, a few days after the funeral. The house was oppressively quiet, filled with the scent of lilies from the dozens of sympathy bouquets that lined the hallways. I found my mother in the study, my dad's study, on the phone with a lawyer. She was talking about his estate, his life insurance, the inheritance. I stood in the doorway, a ghost in my own home. When she hung up, I tried to talk to her. "Mom," I said, my voice cracking. I really miss him." She looked up at me, her eyes distant, already moving on to the next task. "We all do, Alex," she said briskly. "But we have to be strong. We have to be practical. I need to make sure Leo's college fund is secure. His tuition is due in July." She didn't ask how I was feeling. She didn't offer a hug. She just saw another problem to be managed. The lawyer came to the house several times. I was never invited into the meetings. I was told I was too young to be burdened with such things. I was 18, legally an adult, but in her eyes, I was still a child who couldn't be trusted with important matters. She and Leo would sit in the study for hours with the door closed. I later realized she was systematically dismantling the financial protections my father had put in place for both of us, redirecting everything toward her chosen son. The newspaper clipping of my science fair win stayed on the wall in my dad's office for about a month. It was a small comfort, a reminder of his pride. Then one day I walked in, and it was gone. In its place, meticulously centered, was a framed photograph of Leo in his lacrosse uniform, holding a championship trophy. I never asked my mother about it. I didn't have to. The message was perfectly clear. My father's legacy was over. Hers was just beginning. And in her version of the future, there was only room for one successful son. The chasm between me and my family widened into a canyon during our college years. The path for Leo was paved in gold. He, naturally, went to NYU's prestigious Stern School of Business. My mother paid for everything. The full, eye-watering tuition, the upscale apartment in Greenwich Village that was nicer than my entire dorm floor, a generous monthly allowance that was more than what I earned in a semester. Leo needs to be able to focus entirely on his studies and networking, she declared to anyone who would listen, as if he were a prized racehorse. He can't be distracted by trivial things like a part-time job. His college fund, which I would later learn was supposed to be our college fund, was robust, meticulously managed by my mother to ensure he wanted for nothing. I, on the other hand, scrambled. I got into the University of Connecticut for computer science, with a partial academic scholarship that I had worked my tail off in high school to earn. It was my one ticket out, covered about half the cost. For the rest, I was completely on my own. My mother made it clear that her financial resources were tied up in Leo's investment. So I worked 3 different jobs, a chaotic juggling act that left me perpetually exhausted. I coded freelance websites for small businesses late into the night, my eyes burning from staring at the screen. I waited tables at a Greasy Spoon diner on weekends, coming home smelling of fried onions and dealing with condescending customers. I worked the quiet, lonely late-night shifts at the university's IT help desk, fixing printers for frantic students. I lived in a cramped dorm room with 2 other guys, and my diet consisted mostly of instant ramen and the cheapest coffee I could find. I remember one night, scrolling through social media during a break at the diner. I saw a picture Leo had posted. He was on a yacht in the Caribbean for spring break, tanned and smiling, a beautiful girl on his arm, a bottle of champagne in his hand. The caption read, "Working hard or hardly working? Thanks for the getaway, Mom." I was holding a pot of burnt coffee, my back ached, and I had a midterm the next morning. The unfairness of it was a bitter pill to swallow. But I never complained. In a way, the struggle fueled me. I was doing what I loved. The work was brutally hard, but it was honest, and every dollar I earned was my own. Every line of code I wrote felt like a small act of defiance, a tribute to the promise I made to my dad. The phone calls home were always a painful exercise in frustration. Leo just had dinner with a senior partner at Goldman Sachs. My mother would report, her voice buzzing with an excitement she never had for me. "He's making such wonderful connections. His future is practically guaranteed." "That's great, Mom," I'd say, forcing enthusiasm into my voice. "I just finished a project modeling solar panel efficiency for one of my classes. My professor thinks it has real commercial potential." There would be a pause. "Oh," she'd finally reply, the energy draining from her voice. "That's interesting, dear. Now, tell me, are you eating properly? You sound tired." The subject would always change, my achievements dismissed as quaint little hobbies, my struggles ignored. It was in my junior year that a light appeared in the tunnel. His name was Professor David Chin. He was a leading expert in renewable energy systems, a quiet, brilliant man who saw something in my solar panel project that my mother never could. He saw the future. He became my mentor, the first person since my dad who looked at my work and saw potential instead of foolishness. He took me under his wing, giving me access to the university's advanced labs, connecting me with his network of researchers. "Alex, this algorithm is brilliant," he told me one afternoon, peering at my laptop in his cluttered, book-filled office. You're not just tracking data, you're predicting energy needs based on weather patterns and usage habits. This could save companies millions. You're onto something big here. His belief was like water in a desert. It was under his guidance that I developed the first true prototype of my application, the one that would eventually become the foundation of my company. While Leo was learning how to leverage other people's money to make more money, I was learning how to build something from nothing. Something that could actually make a difference. My mother saw life as a race, and in her eyes, I was already lapped. But I was starting to realize it wasn't a race at all. We weren't even running in the same direction. After graduating with honors, a distinction my mother barely acknowledged, I made the tactical, though personally painful, decision to move back home. It was supposed to be a temporary launchpad while I got on my feet, but living under my mother's roof as an adult felt like a regression, a daily surrender. In her house, it felt less like a home and more like a courtroom where I was perpetually on trial for the crime of not being my brother. Leo, by this time, had already landed a high-paying analyst job at a prestigious hedge fund in Manhattan. He was renting a sleek, minimalist apartment in a high-rise my mother had co-signed for, a place with floor-to-ceiling windows and a doorman. He'd come home on some weekends, smelling of expensive cologne and effortless success, talking about seven-figure trades and year-end bonuses, a language my mother understood and adored. I, on the other hand, landed an internship, an unpaid internship. It was at a small, scrappy tech startup in the city called Urban Energy. They were doing fascinating, cutting-edge work in sustainable urban infrastructure, exactly the field I wanted to be in. The CEO was a quiet, intense man named Samir Gupta. He was a brilliant engineer who didn't waste words, but he had a sharp eye for talent. He had found my senior project on a university forum and reached out to me directly, offering me a position. There was a kind, familiar look about him, something in his eyes, but I couldn't place it. At the time, I didn't know the truth. Samir had been a college friend and colleague of my dad's from his early engineering days, one of the few who had stayed in the field. He had recognized my father's name and saw the same spark of passion in me. But he never mentioned it. He wanted to see what I could do on my own merits. To my mother, the phrase unpaid internship was just another way of saying unemployed bum. You have an honors degree in computer science from a good university, and you're working for free? She asked, her voice dripping with a mixture of disdain and genuine bewilderment at the dinner table one night. We were having one of our tense, mostly silent meals. Leo's starting salary is 6 figures. Alex. 6 figures. With a guaranteed bonus. When are you going to get serious about your life and get a real job with a real salary? My Uncle Lawrence, who had a preternatural ability to show up for dinner whenever there was a chance to dispense his patronizing wisdom, chimed in. Now, Eleanor, give the boy a chance, he said, patting my arm with a soft, fleshy hand. It was meant to look like he was defending me, but it was just another form of attack. Every generation has its dreamers. It's a noble gamble, Alex, but a gamble nonetheless. You have to understand finance, you see, that's stability. That's a sure thing. Your brother is building a secure future. This tech stuff, it's a lottery ticket, and most tickets are losers. The message was always the same, a constant, demoralizing chorus. What Leo did was real, what I did was a fantasy. Every single day was a grind. I'd wake up before dawn to catch the commuter train into the city, work 10 to 12 hours for free, soaking up every bit of knowledge I could, and then take the late train home, exhausted, to a house where I felt like a disappointment. I poured every ounce of my being into that internship, driven by a desperate, burning need to prove them all wrong. More than that, I was driven by the quiet, persistent memory of the promise I made to my dad in the garage all those years ago. I just hoped it would be enough. I often wondered, though, if I was chasing a dream or just running from their judgment. At Urban Energy, I thrived. I wasn't just fixing bugs. I was improving core systems. One afternoon, Samir gave me a complex problem that had stumped their senior engineers for weeks. An inefficiency in their data processing that was costing them server time and money. I locked myself in a small conference room for 2 days, fueled by coffee and a stubborn refusal to fail. I didn't just fix it. I rewrote the entire module, making it 10 times faster. I presented it to Samir, my hands trembling slightly. He reviewed my work in silence, his expression unreadable. After 5 long minutes, he just nodded slowly and said, "Good work, Moore. Very good work." Coming from him, it felt like winning an Olympic medal. It was a small victory, but it was mine, and it kept the flame of hope alive in the cold, dismissive atmosphere of my home. And that brings us back to that night. The night that cleaved my life into a before and an after. The night of Leo and Chloe's engagement dinner. It wasn't just one comment that set my mother off. It was the culmination of years of simmering resentment, a pressure cooker that was finally, inevitably, going to explode. I had come to the dinner table that night armed with a small, fragile piece of hope. That very afternoon, Samir Gupta had called me into his office. He had that same serious, intense look on his face. "Alex," he'd said, "your work on the predictive energy algorithm has been revolutionary for us. You've done the work of a whole team." He leaned forward. "We're a small company, we can't offer you the kind of salary your brother makes, not yet. But we are offering you a full-time position as lead project engineer, and stock options. A significant number of them. If this company succeeds, you succeed in a very big way." It was the first real, tangible validation of my entire career. A real job, a leadership title, a stake in the future I was helping to build. I thought maybe, just maybe, this would be enough. Maybe this was the language they would finally understand. So when Leo smirked about my little computer projects, I took a deep breath and laid my cards on the table. "Actually," I said, trying to keep my voice steady and professional, "I was just promoted to lead project engineer today. It's a full-time, salaried position." My mother just waved a dismissive hand, not even looking at me. "A lead of what? A team of one? Alex, please, don't embarrass yourself with these inflated titles." Chloe let out a tinkling, condescending laugh. "Oh, that's sweet. It's so important to have a passion, isn't it? My cousin has an Etsy shop. I think it's wonderful." The comparison, the sheer, willful ignorance of it, was like a slap in the face. That's when I finally broke. The years of swallowing my pride, of accepting their dismissals, it all came rushing to the surface. "Why do you do this?" I asked, my voice cracking with an emotion I could no longer contain. "Why is nothing I ever do good enough for you? This is my career. I work 60 hours a week. It matters to me. It's important work that could actually help people, not just make rich people richer." The jab at Leo's profession was a mistake. My mother's face hardened into a mask of cold fury. "Important?" she scoffed, her voice low and menacing. "Let me tell you what's important, since you are clearly so naive. Providing for your family, building a legacy, securing your future. Your brother understands that. He's making a name for himself. He is securing his family's future. You are playing in a sandbox, and you are dragging our family name down with you. I am tired of making excuses for you to my friends. I am tired of being embarrassed by my own son." That's when she stood up and delivered the final, crushing blow. The speech about me being a failure. About giving the house, our family home, to Leo. It was a carefully planned, brutally efficient execution. Leo's complete lack of surprise, Chloe's smug look of satisfaction. They had all discussed it beforehand. This wasn't a spontaneous decision. This was a verdict that had been reached long ago. This was just the sentencing. After everything Dad did to build this family, to provide for us, you're just giving his house away? I choked out, the words tasting like ash. The mention of my father was my last, desperate appeal. "Your father was a dreamer, just like you," she spat, her words laced with a venom that shocked me. "He was soft, and look where it got him. I am a realist, Alex. This house is a major asset. It's a part of my inheritance to my children, and I'm giving it to the child who won't squander it on foolish dreams and worthless hobbies. If you can't respect my decision, in my own house, then you can get out." The silence that followed was absolute, profound. No one defended me. No one said a single word. I looked from my mother's cold, triumphant face to my brother's equally victorious one. He wouldn't even meet my eyes. He just stared down at his plate, a small smile playing on his lips. And I finally, completely, understood. I wasn't their son or their brother. I was a problem, a loose end, a disappointment they had finally figured out how to cut away. I drove for what felt like hours, the familiar, tree-lined streets of Greenwich blurring into an abstract painting of grief and rage. My duffel bag sat on the passenger seat, a pathetic testament to the life I had just been evicted from. My phone buzzed incessantly. It was my college friend, Ben. Dude, what the hell happened? Leo's fiancée just posted a picture of them on Instagram toasting champagne. The caption says, "Celebrating our new home. Call me." I couldn't speak. The humiliation was a physical thing, a knot in my chest that made it hard to breathe. They were celebrating. While I was driving aimlessly with nowhere to go, they were celebrating getting rid of me. My mind was a chaotic storm, but one desperate, last-ditch idea emerged from the wreckage. My Uncle Lawrence. He lived just 20 minutes away, in a sprawling, ostentatious mansion he'd gotten through his marriage to a wealthy heiress. He had always positioned himself as the cool uncle, the one who pretended to be on my side, even while subtly feeding my mother's narrative that I was a lost cause. Maybe, just maybe, faced with the reality of his nephew being homeless, he would show a shred of human decency. I pulled into his long, curved driveway, the gravel crunching under my tires. The house was lit up like a luxury hotel. I rang the bell, and after a long moment, the heavy, ornate door creaked open. He stood there himself, wearing a silk robe and holding a glass of whiskey. His usual jovial mask was gone. His face was stern, guarded. "Alex, what on earth are you doing here at this hour?" he asked, not making a move to let me in. He physically blocked the doorway. "Uncle Lawrence," I began, my voice hoarse and raw. "Mom, she kicked me out. She's giving the house to Leo. The whole house. I have nowhere to go. I just need a place to stay for a few nights. Just until I can figure things out. Find an apartment." He sighed. A long theatrical sigh of deep disappointment. He swirled the whiskey in his glass. "I heard," he said coolly. "Your mother called me. And honestly, Alex, I'm not surprised. Your mother is a practical woman. A strong woman. You can't expect to live off her generosity forever while you chase these technological fantasies." "They're not fantasies," I said, my fists clenching at my sides. "I have a job. A real job. I was just promoted. A job that doesn't pay you a living wage? Come on, son," he said, shaking his head with a look of pity that was more insulting than anger. "Look, I can't have you here. It would be a profound disrespect to your mother's decision. Family needs to present a united front. Taking you in would undermine her authority, and frankly, it would enable your irresponsible behavior." The sheer hypocrisy of it stunned me into silence. This man, who had done nothing on his own merits, was lecturing me on responsibility. "So that's it?" I asked, my voice a low whisper. "You're just going to turn your back on me? Dad's own brother-in-law." He looked me straight in the eye, his voice devoid of any warmth, any trace of family affection. "I'm not turning my back, Alex. I'm helping your mother teach you a lesson your father was always too soft to teach you. The world is a tough, unforgiving place. It's time you grew up and faced it. Consider this a gift, the gift of rock bottom. It's a great place to build from, or so they say." He offered me a thin, final smile, and the door began to close. I saw the lock turn. That was it. That was the bottom. Every single door had been slammed and locked in my face. I stood there in his perfectly manicured driveway, under the cold, indifferent stars. The despair was a physical weight, pressing down on me. But then, something inside me shifted. The grief, the humiliation, the despair. They began to burn. The fire didn't consume me. It forged something new inside my chest. Something cold and hard and unbreakable. Determination. They thought I would sink. They had thrown me into the deep end, just as my uncle said. Fine. I would swim. I would swim faster and farther than they could ever imagine. and I would build an ocean of my own. I got back in my beaten-up car, drove away from that house, away from that town, and for the first time in my life I didn't look back. I was done with them. I was completely and utterly done. The next few months were a brutal, disorienting blur of cheap coffee, sleepless nights, and the constant, dull hum of a computer server. I found a tiny, run-down studio apartment in a rough part of Brooklyn. It had peeling paint, a radiator that clanged like a blacksmith's anvil all night, and a window that looked out onto a brick wall. It was all I could afford with the meager savings I had. But it was mine. For the first time in my life, I felt truly terrifyingly free. The crushing weight of my family's expectations was gone, replaced by the exhilarating, razor-sharp pressure of pure survival. I enacted a scorched earth policy. I blocked my mother's number, my brother's, my uncle's. I went dark on all social media. The only person I stayed in touch with was my friend Ben, who would check in every couple of weeks with a simple text. "You still alive?" It was a lifeline to a world I used to know, a reminder that one person out there still cared. My entire focus, every waking moment, became my work at Urban Energy. Now that I was a full-time, salaried employee, even if the salary was barely enough to cover rent and ramen, I poured every ounce of my energy into it. I was the first one in the office and the last one to leave. My grief and anger became fuel. Every line of code was a brick in the new life I was building. One evening, feeling stuck on a particularly complex problem and overwhelmed by loneliness, I took a chance and reached out to my old mentor, Professor Chun. We met for coffee at a small cafe near his university. I told him everything that had happened, the dinner, the house, the rejection from my uncle. I laid it all out, the whole ugly story. He listened patiently, his expression calm and unreadable. When I finished, he didn't offer the empty platitudes of sympathy I was expecting. He offered a strategy. "There's someone I think you should meet," he said, pulling out his phone. "Her name is Jessica Vance. She's a venture capitalist. She is notoriously tough, a real shark, but she's one of the smartest people I know. And her entire fund is focused on disruptive green technology. Your algorithm, Alex, is bigger than just a feature in someone else's company. It deserves to be its own entity. It's time to stop building for other people and start building for yourself." The meeting was in a sterile, glass-walled conference room on the 40th floor of a skyscraper in Midtown Manhattan. The view alone was worth more than all my possessions. Jessica Vance was exactly as Professor Chun had described. She was sharp, impeccably dressed in a power suit, and she radiated an aura of intimidating intelligence. Her questions were like surgical strikes, precise and designed to find any weakness. She didn't care about my family drama or my passion. She cared about the market, scalability, the total addressable market, my customer acquisition cost projections. For an hour, I stood in front of a whiteboard and walked her through my application, my business plan, my 5-year vision. I laid out the future as I saw it, a future powered by smart, predictive, sustainable energy. I was terrified, my heart pounding in my chest, but my voice was steady. I knew my stuff. This was the one area of my life where I felt completely confident. I expected her to tear it apart, to find a dozen flaws I hadn't considered. Instead, when I was finished, she leaned back in her expensive leather chair and just stared at me for a long, silent moment that stretched into an eternity. "Most people who come in here are trying to build a better mousetrap," she said finally, her voice crisp and decisive. "They want to make an existing process 1% more efficient. You're not doing that, Mr. Moore. You're trying to eliminate the need for the mousetrap entirely. You're building an infrastructure." She stood up and extended a hand. "I'm in. My fund will provide $75,000 in seed money for a 20% stake in your new company." I felt the air leave my lungs in a rush. $75,000. It was more money than I had ever seen in my life. It was a chance. A real, tangible chance to build my own dream. I walked out of that building onto the bustling streets of New York, my head spinning. I looked up at the towering skyscrapers, the symbols of the world my brother belonged to, the world that had cast me out. But for the first time, I didn't feel small or insignificant. I felt like I was finally building something just as tall. I decided to name my new company Viridian Dynamics. It was the first brick in my new life, and I had laid it myself. Starting a company from scratch is like trying to build a plane while it's already falling out of the sky. The first few months of Viridian Dynamics were a chaotic testament to that truth. The company's world headquarters was my tiny Brooklyn apartment. The server, which held the entire company's intellectual property, hummed next to my bed, and my conference room was the small, wobbly table in my kitchen. But Jessica's investment wasn't just money. It was credibility. It was a stamp of approval from a world that had previously been inaccessible to me. My first hire was a brilliant young software engineer named Marco Diaz. He was fresh out of Carnegie Mellon, hungry, idealistic, and he believed in the mission. He didn't care that our office was my living room or that our coffee was instant. He saw the elegance and potential in the code. Together, we were a two-man army. We worked day and night, fueled by cheap pizza and a shared, obsessive vision. We refined the algorithm, built a user interface, and started the soul-crushing process of trying to find our first client. We faced a relentless stream of rejections. We'd pitch to potential clients, and they'd see two young guys with a laptop and a dream, and they'd politely show us the door. The seed money was draining with alarming speed. There was one particularly dark week about 3 months in. Our main server crashed in the middle of the night, wiping out 2 days of work. A potential client we had been courting for weeks sent a curt email saying they were going in a different direction. The money in the bank was dwindling. Doubt, that cold, familiar shadow, began to creep in. The voices of my mother and my uncle echoed in my ears. A foolish gamble, a lottery ticket, a waste of a life. I sat on the floor of my apartment at 3 a.m., surrounded by empty coffee cups, and I seriously considered giving up. Marco found me like that. He just sat down on the floor next to me, not saying a word. After a few minutes of silence, he just said, "So, we rebuild the server, and we find another client. We knew this was going to be hard, Alex. If it were easy, someone else would have already done it." His simple, unwavering belief was the lifeline I needed. We got back to work. Our breakthrough came from an unexpected place. I had been targeting large, sexy tech corporations, but Marco suggested we think smaller, more practical. We found a regional chain of grocery stores, Harrison's Market, run by a third-generation owner, a no-nonsense man named Mr. Harrison. He was known for being a tough but fair businessman who valued community and practical innovation over flashy presentations. Getting a meeting with him was almost impossible. But I was persistent. I sent him a personalized, one-page letter, not an email, explaining in simple terms what we could do for him. To my astonishment, his assistant called me a week later and gave me a 15-minute slot. Marco and I walked into his modest, wood-paneled office. I didn't talk about venture capital or stock options or disruptive paradigms. I talked about his stores. I talked about how our system could reduce his electricity bills by 30%, savings he could pass on to his customers or reinvest in his employees' healthcare. I talked about building a more sustainable future for the community his family had served for 50 years. He listened, his weathered face thoughtful, his sharp eyes scrutinizing me. At the end of our pitch, he leaned forward, folding his hands on his desk. "I get a dozen pitches a week from slick tech kids who want to sell me something I don't need," he said, his voice a low grumble. "You're different. You're not selling software. You're selling a solution. My father always told me to invest in people who believe in what they're doing." He paused. "I'll give you a shot. We'll run a pilot program in our 3 largest stores. Don't make me regret this, son." Marco and I walked out of that meeting in a daze, not speaking until we were out on the street. Then we just looked at each other and burst out laughing. It wasn't a multi-million-dollar contract, but it was everything. It was a foothold. It was a chance to prove that our foolish dream could deliver real, tangible results. The storm wasn't over, but for the first time, I could see a break in the clouds. 3 years. That's how long it took. 3 years of relentless, obsessive, all-consuming work. The pilot program with Harrison's Market was a resounding success. We didn't just cut their energy bills by 30%. We cut them by 35%, and we identified two major sources of energy waste they hadn't even known about. Mr. Harrison was thrilled. He became our biggest advocate, our most vocal champion. He personally recommended us to other business owners in his network. And just like that, the dam broke. Word spread. That single, hard-won contract turned into a dozen, then 100. Viridian Dynamics didn't just grow. It exploded. We moved from my apartment to a small, cramped office, then to a full floor in a sleek glass and steel building in downtown Brooklyn. Our team grew from 2 to 16, then to 50 brilliant engineers, data scientists, and sales professionals. We secured a series of funding round led by a major Silicon Valley firm that made Jessica Vance's initial investment look like pocket change. My little computer project was now providing smart energy solutions for businesses across New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut, saving them millions of dollars and significantly reducing their carbon footprint. I was no longer the broke, homeless kid kicked out of his home. I was the founder and CEO of a multimillion-dollar company. But the money, as cliché as it sounds, was never the point. It was a byproduct. The point was the work. The point was proving that a vision for a better, more sustainable world wasn't a waste of time. It was the future. With my success came a level of financial freedom I had never imagined possible. I could have bought a penthouse in Manhattan with skyline views, a flashy sports car to rival the one my mother bought Leo, all the glittering symbols of success that my mother and brother valued so highly. But I wanted something different. I wanted something real. I wanted a home. Not just a house, but a home. A place that was a physical manifestation of everything I believed in. My lawyer helped me find the perfect piece of land. It was a beautiful 7-acre wooded lot back in Greenwich, not far from where I grew up. It sat on a quiet, secluded road. Felt right. Felt like closing a circle, but on my own terms. On that land, I didn't just build a house. I built a statement. I hired the best architects and engineers in the country, specialists in sustainable design. We designed a modern, minimalist masterpiece of glass, steel, and reclaimed wood that blended seamlessly into the surrounding forest. It was completely self-sustaining, a living laboratory for the technology my company was creating. It was fully integrated with our own systems, running on a vast array of hidden solar panels, with a geothermal heating and cooling system, and a state-of-the-art water reclamation system that recycled every drop of water used. It was a net-zero home. It actually produced more energy than it consumed, feeding the surplus back into the town's power grid. The construction took over a year. I was there every week, overseeing every detail. One day, while the foundation was being poured, I found an old, rusted metal box buried near a large oak tree. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were a set of hand-drawn blueprints. They were dated 20 years ago. They were my father's. They were his original amateur sketches for the sustainable home he had dreamed of building on this very land. Seeing his familiar handwriting, his notes in the margins, it was like a message from the past, an affirmation that I was on the right path. The finished house was my sanctuary. It was quiet, beautiful, and a testament to the power of a dream. I had built it from nothing. I didn't do it to show off or to spite my family. I did it for me. I did it for the promise I made to my dad. It was a place of peace, far removed from the noise and judgment of my past. I never thought my family would even see it. I certainly never invited them. But in a town as small and insular as Greenwich, secrets don't stay secret for long. It was a perfect, sunny Saturday afternoon in late September. I was in my home office, which was enclosed in glass and felt like being in a treehouse for adults, reviewing some quarterly reports. My phone, which was linked to the front gate security camera, buzzed. I glanced at the screen and my blood ran cold. A sleek, black Mercedes, Leo's car, had pulled up to my gate. My brother was in the driver's seat. His wife, Chloe, was beside him. They just sat there for a full minute, motionless, just staring up the long driveway at the house. I could see Leo's face with perfect clarity on the high-definition camera feed. His jaw was literally hanging open. He was pointing, talking animatedly to Chloe, who looked equally stunned, her hand covering her mouth. Then he fumbled for his phone. I knew exactly who he was calling. I watched, a detached, clinical observer of my own life, as he got out of the car and paced back and forth, gesturing wildly at the house. He was shouting into the phone, and even though I couldn't hear the words, I could read the panic and disbelief on his face. "Mom, you won't believe this. There's this insane modern mansion on the old Miller property. It must be worth 10, maybe 20 million. Wait, hold on." I watched as he walked closer to the gate, squinting at the small, discreet address plaque I had installed. The plaque didn't have a number. It just had one word: more. Wait a second. The name. It can't be. "Mom, this house it's his. It's Alex's." An hour later, as I knew it would, another car pulled up to the gate. A familiar silver Lexus. My mother. She got out of the car, looking smaller and older than I remembered. Her face was pale. She approached the gate, saw the camera lens, and spoke directly to it, her voice tinny and strange through the speaker. "Alex, please, it's your mother. We need to talk. Please, just open the gate." Against my better judgment, against every self-preservation instinct I had, I pressed the button. The heavy steel gate slid open silently. I decided to meet her on my own terms, on my own ground. I walked down the stone path and met her on the front steps. She looked around, her eyes wide, taking in the clean lines of the architecture, the floor-to-ceiling glass that reflected the autumn trees, the quiet, powerful hum of a perfectly balanced ecosystem. This was a world she didn't understand, and it terrified her. "Alex," she breathed, her voice filled with a fake, honeyed tone I knew all too well. It was her damage control voice. I had no idea. "I am so proud of you." She took a step closer, reaching for my arm. "I was wrong. I was so wrong to push you away. Can you ever forgive me?" I didn't move. I didn't let her touch me. I just stood there, my arms crossed, feeling nothing but a profound, weary emptiness. "You're not proud of me," I said, my voice flat and even. "You're impressed by this." I gestured to the house. "This is just another version of Leo's sports car to you. It's a symbol of wealth and status. It's the only language you understand." "That's not true," she insisted, her eyes welling up with tears that I knew were completely manufactured. "I made a mistake. I was scared for you. I was trying to protect you, to push you towards what I thought was success. I want you back in my life. I want my family back." That's when the years of buried anger finally rose to the surface. It wasn't hot and explosive. It was cold and sharp and precise. "My family? You declared I wasn't part of your family 3 years ago. You threw me out with nothing but a duffel bag and the clothes on my back. But look what you've built," she pleaded, her voice rising. "It all worked out for the best, didn't it? My pushing you was the motivation you needed." I laughed, a short, humorless, brutal sound. "It worked out because I left. It worked out with no help from you. In fact, it worked out in spite of you." I took a deep breath, ready to deliver the final, killing blow. The one piece of the story she never knew, the one that would dismantle her entire self-conception. "You want to know the real reason I built this house, right here on this specific piece of land?" I asked, my voice dropping to a near whisper. "Do you have any idea who bought this property 20 years ago? Before the Millers?" She looked confused, her manipulative tears forgotten. "No, I don't remember." "Let me remind you," I said, my voice like ice. "A young software engineer bought it. He had a dream of building a self-sustaining family home, a place where technology and nature could coexist, a place to raise his 2 sons away from the poison of Wall Street. He poured all his savings into it. He even drew up the blueprints himself." I paused, letting the words sink in. But his wife thought it was a foolish, impractical dream. She mocked him for it, told him to sell it and invest in something real, something that would impress her friends. So he did. He sold the land. He gave up his dream. And he went into finance to please her. The color drained from her face as the memory, the one she had deliberately buried, came rushing back. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Yes, I said softly, twisting the knife. Dad bought this land. This was his dream. The dream you called stupid. The dream you made him sacrifice. I pulled my phone from my pocket, swiped to a photo of the old, hand-drawn blueprints I had found, and held it up for her to see. His familiar handwriting was in the corner. I didn't build this house for you. I didn't build it to impress you or Leo. I built it for him. I finished what he started. So don't you dare come here to my father's house and try to claim any part of this victory. You are not welcome here. She just stood there, speechless, her face a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. For the first time in my entire life, I had left my mother with absolutely nothing to say. This is the moment that changed everything, when I finally took back control of my own story. Thank you for staying with me to this point. You are amazing. Please help me out by liking this video and commenting the number 1 below, just so I know you made it this far with me. It not only helps more people find this story, but it also lets me know that my experiences mean something to someone out there. Your support is the biggest motivation for me to continue sharing the rest of this journey. In a town like Greenwich, gossip is a more valuable currency than gold. The story of what happened at my gate, of my mother's confrontation and my final revelation, spread through the manicured lawns and exclusive country clubs like a particularly virulent strain of ivy. Leo must have told someone, who told their spouse, who told their tennis partner. The narrative wasn't just the simple, satisfying tale of the failure son becoming wildly successful. It was darker, more complex. It was the story of a mother who had not only cast out her son but had also crushed her late husband's dream. A dream that son had then resurrected in the most spectacular way possible. It was the one thing my mother's carefully curated world couldn't tolerate. A stain on her public image, a story that painted her not as a strong matriarch, but as a cruel, materialistic hypocrite. Her friends, the ones she had lunch with every Tuesday, the ones she played bridge with, started to pull away. The calls stopped. The invitations to charity galas and dinner parties dried up. She had built her entire identity on being the mother of a successful Wall Street star, the widow of a respected financier, the queen of her social circle. I had exposed the ugly, rotten foundation beneath the flawless facade. Her status, the currency she valued above all else, was suddenly irrevocably devalued. One afternoon, I was in a local coffee shop, a place I rarely went, to meet with a contractor. While I was waiting, I overheard 2 women at the next table. They were older, impeccably dressed, and I recognized them as being part of my mother's circle. They were speaking in low, conspiratorial whispers. "Can you even imagine?" one of them said. "To do that to her own son. And after what he revealed about Richard's dream for that land. It's just monstrous." "I know," the other replied, stirring her cappuccino. Eleanor always went on about how impractical Richard was before he went into finance. It turns out she was the one who was short-sighted. She tried to call me yesterday, and I let it go to voicemail. What is there to even say? I sat there, hidden behind my laptop, and felt a strange, hollow sensation. It wasn't triumph. It wasn't joy. It was just a quiet, sad confirmation of the world I had escaped. A week after our confrontation, I got a text from a number I didn't recognize. "Still playing with your little tech toys, I see. Quite the expensive treehouse you've built. Don't forget who has the real education. Your brother deserved that house. Family should be loyal." It was my Uncle Lawrence. The same condescending tone, the same petty jealousy, the same twisted definition of loyalty. 3 years ago, a message like that would have wounded me, sent me into a spiral of self-doubt. Now, it was just pathetic. It was the desperate squeak of a man whose entire worldview was crumbling. I didn't feel anger. I felt a distant, clinical pity. I deleted the message without a second thought and blocked the number. I was done engaging with their poison. My peace was more valuable than any last word. My friend Ben called me a few days later. "Man, you've really shaken the hornet's nest," he said, a note of awe in his voice. "My mom plays bridge with some of your mom's old friends. Apparently, Eleanor is a total wreck. She's telling everyone you've been brainwashed by new money. and have forgotten the meaning of family. I just sighed, looking out my office window at the calm, peaceful woods. The meaning of her family was a transaction, Ben. I just refused to be the bad investment anymore. He was quiet for a moment. Well, for what it's worth, he said. My mom told me everyone sees right through it. They know what she did. In their world, being publicly humiliated is worse than being broke. She's the one who looks like a fool. It was a strange feeling. I hadn't sought revenge. I had only sought to build a life for myself. But justice, in its own slow, inexorable way, was being served. The social standing my mother had sacrificed her own son for was evaporating before her very eyes. All because of a truth she could no longer control. About a month later, I got a call from an unexpected person. Samir Gupta, my first boss, my dad's old friend. He had seen an article about Viridian dynamics in a business journal and wanted to offer his congratulations. We agreed to meet for lunch. We sat at a quiet corner table at a restaurant downtown. After some small talk about the business and the rapid growth of the company, he got a serious look on his face. Alex, he said, leaning forward slightly, I've been thinking a lot about your dad lately, seeing your success. He would be so incredibly proud. But there's something I think you should know. Something I probably should have told you years ago, but it wasn't my place. He took a sip of water. Richard wasn't just a brilliant engineer. He was also a very careful, meticulous planner, especially after you boys were born. He worried about the future. He slid a file folder he had brought with him across the table. Before he died, Richard set up a substantial trust fund, an inheritance for his boys. I helped him with some of the paperwork. It was to be split evenly between you and Leo, to be accessed for your education, and then the remainder to be given to you both when you turn 25. He appointed your mother as the trustee, never imagining she would do anything but honor his wishes. I stared at him, my mind struggling to process his words. A trust fund? I never saw a cent of that. My mother told me all Dad left was the house and a mountain of debt from some bad investments he made right before he passed. Samir shook his head sadly, a look of deep regret in his eyes. That was a lie, Alex. A cruel one. Richard was an excellent investor. There was no debt. In fact, the trust was worth over $2 million when he passed away. After he died, your mother's lawyer, a man I know to be ruthless, petitioned the probate court to dissolve the trust. As the sole guardian, she argued that the funds were needed for Leo's specialized education and to maintain the family's standard of living. She was granted full control of the entire amount. Your half of the college fund, your half of the inheritance. She poured all of it into Leo's future, and she erased yours. The sandwich on my plate suddenly seemed inedible. It all clicked into place with a sickening thud. Leo's fully paid NYU tuition. His lavish apartment in the city, his generous allowance, his seed money for his first brilliant investments after graduation. It wasn't just my mother's money. It was my father's money. It was my money. She hadn't just emotionally abandoned me. She had financially disinherited me. She had stolen my father's last gift to me, his final act of love and protection, and handed it all to my brother. The betrayal was so profound, so absolute, it was almost surreal. I looked at Samir, my mind reeling. I expected to feel a fresh wave of rage, of a desire for a legal battle, for retribution. But instead, a strange, profound sense of calm washed over me. It wasn't a new wound. It was just a final, detailed explanation for an old one. It confirmed everything I already knew about her character, about her priorities. It solidified my decision to walk away, not with anger, but with the quiet, unshakable certainty that I had done the only thing I could. My father had tried to give me a safety net. My mother had taken a pair of scissors and cut it to shreds. And I had learned to fly on my own anyway. Another year passed. Life moved on, not with the high drama of confrontations and revelations, but with the steady, quiet, satisfying rhythm of purpose. Viridian Dynamics continued its upward trajectory. We expanded our operations into Maryland and Pennsylvania, our predictive energy technology becoming the new gold standard for corporate energy sustainability. We were no longer a scrappy startup. We were a major player in the green tech space. I was no longer just a CEO. I was a recognized innovator, invited to speak at major industry conferences and universities about the future of sustainable technology. My life wasn't about the money or the accolades, though they were nice validations of the hard work. It was about the work itself. It was about the team I had built around me. Marco, my first employee, was now my chief technology officer, a brilliant leader in his own right who was respected throughout the industry. We had built a company culture based on respect, collaboration, and a shared passion for solving difficult problems. The exact opposite of the toxic, zero-sum hierarchy of my childhood family. These people, my team, my mentor Professor Chun, my loyal friend Ben, they were my real family. The one I had chosen, the one that had chosen me back, not the one I was born into by accident of biology. The house my father had dreamed of, the house I had built, became my true sanctuary. I spent my weekends hiking the wooded trails on the property, my dog running ahead of me. I'd read for hours in the sun-filled living room that overlooked the forest, or I'd work on new, experimental projects in the workshop I'd built in the basement. Sometimes, I'd just sit in silence, feeling the peaceful, efficient hum of the home systems running around me. It was a home filled with peace, not pressure. It was a place where I could finally, truly breathe. I developed a new routine. One of my proudest achievements was starting an internship program at Viridian Dynamics, specifically for promising students from state universities and community colleges. Kids like me, who had the talent but not the connections. I made it a point to mentor them personally. I remember one intern in particular, a young woman named Sarah. She was brilliant, but shy and full of self-doubt. She reminded me so much of myself at that age. I saw her struggling with a piece of code one afternoon, getting frustrated. I walked over not to give her the answer, but to talk her through the problem, just as my dad had done with me. "What's the core problem you're trying to solve?" I asked her. We spent an hour at the whiteboard, sketching out ideas. When she finally solved it herself, the look of pride and excitement on her face was more rewarding than any multimillion-dollar contract. I was breaking the cycle. I was becoming the supportive figure for others that my father had been for me. I was paying his legacy forward. I never unblocked my family's numbers. I heard whispers about them through the grapevine, through Ben or the occasional news clipping, but I never sought them out. My mother had apparently sold the old house, the one she had so ceremoniously gifted to Leo, and downsized to a small condo. Her social life had never recovered from the scandal. My Uncle Lawrence, I heard, was facing serious financial troubles of his own after a messy and very expensive divorce. I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no anger, no pity. They were characters in a book I had finished reading a long time ago. Their story was no longer my story. My story was about looking forward, about building, about creating a legacy of innovation and mentorship that my father would have been proud of. I was finally at peace, healed from a wound I once thought would define me forever. I was more than just a survivor of my past. I was the architect of my own future. The final chapter of my old life, the epilogue I never asked for, came to me as it often did through Ben. He called me one evening, his voice hesitant, a tone I knew meant he had bad news he didn't want to share. "Hey man, got some weird news. You might want to sit down for this." He told me that Leo and Chloe's marriage, the one that had been celebrated on the night of my exile, had imploded in spectacular fashion. The pressure of my success, contrasted with their own stagnant life, had become a constant, toxic presence in their home. Chloe, apparently, had never let Leo forget that his failure of a brother now owned one of the most talked about and valuable homes in Greenwich. The envy had become corrosive, eating away at their relationship until nothing was left but resentment and blame. They were in the middle of a nasty divorce. But that wasn't the worst of it. The real disaster was financial. "After you built your house," Ben explained, his voice a mixture of disbelief and pity, "Leo became obsessed. He went a little crazy. He was desperate to one-up you, to prove he was still the real success story. So he quit his safe, high-paying job at the hedge fund and poured all his money, and a significant amount of your mom's, into a high-risk real estate venture." My stomach tightened. I had a sick feeling I knew where this was going. What kind of venture? He tried to copy you, Ben said. He started a development company to build luxury eco-mansions. He thought he could just slap some solar panels on a big, tacky house and call it green tech. He had no idea what he was doing, Alex. He didn't have your knowledge, your technical background, your passion. He was just chasing the image, the status. He was building monuments to his own ego. The project was a predictable, unmitigated disaster. He cut corners, used cheap materials, and his designs were inefficient and ugly. The whole thing was built on a foundation of arrogance and ignorance. The real estate market took a slight downturn, his investors got spooked and pulled out, and he was left holding a portfolio of half-finished, unsellable McMansions that were bleeding money. He had tried to play my game without understanding any of the rules, and he had lost spectacularly. He had declared bankruptcy. The final, bitter irony? The house my mother had kicked me out of, the grand prize she had awarded her golden child, the very symbol of his victory and my defeat, was now gone. To cover his mountain of debts in the bankruptcy and divorce proceedings, the court had forced its sale. It was seized by the bank and auctioned off for a fraction of its value to pay off his creditors. The ultimate symbol of his triumph had become the public monument to his failure. He had been given everything, the elite education, the family connections, the financial backing, the family home, my stolen inheritance. And he had turned it all to ash. I had been given nothing but a broken heart and a promise to my father. And from that, I had built an empire. It wasn't a victory. I felt no joy in hearing about his downfall. It was a tragedy. A hollow, wasteful story of how envy, when left unchecked, will always consume itself. And I was just glad, so deeply, profoundly glad, that I was finally far enough away to not get burned by the flames. So here I am today. I'm in my office, the one that feels like it's floating in the trees, the late afternoon sun slanting through the glass walls. On my desk, next to the sleek monitors displaying the real-time energy data of 1,000 buildings across the country, is a single old photograph in a simple wooden frame. It's of me and my dad, taken in our garage almost 20 years ago. We're standing next to a whiteboard covered in his messy, brilliant handwriting, a younger, scrawnier version of me beaming next to him, full of a hope I had long since forgotten and only recently rediscovered. Sometimes I look at that photo and think about the long, twisted, painful road that brought me to this exact spot. For a long time, especially in the early, angry days, I thought this journey was about proving my mother and brother wrong. I fantasized about the day I would be successful enough to rub it in their faces. I thought success would be the ultimate revenge. But I was mistaken. Standing here now, in this house built on a dream, running a company built on a promise, I finally realized the truth. My journey was never about proving them wrong. It was about proving my father right. He believed that passion had value beyond a price tag. He believed that building something meaningful was more important than chasing a number on a spreadsheet. He believed that the future belonged to those who were brave enough to create it. He believed in me. My mother saw a failure, a waste of a life, but my dad saw a future, and I spent the last several years of my life simply trying to build the world he saw. I haven't spoken to my mother or my brother since that day at my gate. I don't know if I ever will. I've learned that forgiveness isn't about absolving them. It's about freeing myself from the anger. And I am free. But that freedom doesn't require a reunion. Some bridges, once burned, are never meant to be rebuilt. My real family is the team that walks into the Viridian Dynamics office every morning, ready to change the world with me. My family is my friend Ben, who never stopped checking in. My family is the memory of my father, a guiding principle that lives inside me. My story isn't about getting rich or getting even. It's about the quiet, unshakable power of staying true to yourself, even when the people who are supposed to love you the most tell you that you are worthless. It's about understanding that sometimes the greatest thing a toxic family can give you is the freedom that comes when they finally, mercifully, let you go. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it resonated with you in some way. Have you ever faced a situation where you had to choose between your passion and your family's expectations? Share your story in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. And please, Don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss what comes next.